In the 1920s, psychic phenomena, spiritual stuff, what we now would call New Age, was really prominent among the upper class. Madame Blavatsky and her Order of the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley, Satanism, and psychic ideals such as spiritualism, reincarnation, and so forth were super trendy. Seances were common, and well-known authors and social figures were interested in this. It was surprisingly widespread. For example, Arthur Conan Doyle created Sherlock Holmes. He was a spiritualist. He had a firm belief in the many-tiered, complex afterlife that spiritualism offers. This amazed me when I found out, because of course there are zero supernatural elements to Sherlock Holmes. It's all, like, whenever there's a ghost or anything, it's always explained away. Now, I've mentioned in other videos that I'm interested in the history of warfare. Well, it turns out the person who had the single biggest influence in tank warfare, which led directly to World War II, the Blitzkrieg, and the continued success of armored warfare worldwide, was J.F.C. Fuller, a famous military historian and theoretician. I own and have read lots of Fuller's books. He was also keen on Satanism and other esoteric studies. I don't think he was an outright Satanist, but he dabbled. I suspect most people are unaware of this connection between tank warfare and the devil, but makes sense, right? What does this have to do with Lovecraft? Lovecraft, of course, thought all of this spiritualist stuff was rot, but he knew it was popular, and it had an impact on Lovecraft's fiction since it was, spooky magic stuff. Certainly, his interest in secretive cults and arcane lore came from groups like the Order of the Old Golden Dawn, Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, the Rosicrucians. His own cults and books, such as the Necronomicon, parallel these. It's only natural. And at least once, it influences writings hugely. In 1926, Lovecraft wrote the very spiritualist story, The Silver Key. Frankly, it's one of my least favorite tales. It's a sort of sequel to The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath and stars Randolph Carter. I'm not going to worry about spoilers for The Silver Key because it's a short story, doesn't have any real revelations. It's the same genre as his Tale of the Tomb about how the hero isn't in sync with modern society. This really resonated with Lovecraft, who, was not in sync with modern society. On the other hand, I don't really think Lovecraft would have fit into the society of a century before. Lovecraft was born to be an outsider, which is why, in fact, his tale, The Outsider, is the perfect introduction to the man. Anyhow, in The Silver Key, Randolph Carter mopes around till he finds a magic key and then can return to the Dreamlands. The end. There's more to it than that, but dreamers languishing away because society is mean and doesn't let them do whatever they want without working is not my favorite Lovecraft theme. Anyway, there's more, and that's where this tale is leading. A pulp author, E. Hoffman Price, loved The Silver Key, unlike me. 6 years after The Silver Key was published, Price contacts Lovecraft and basically talked him into doing a sequel to The Silver Key. Lovecraft seems to have been reluctant at first, but eventually Price prevailed on him. So Price wrote a version, and then Lovecraft wrote his version, which was much longer and really switched up what Price had done. Price, who was a cool guy, to his credit, always said that Lovecraft's version was much better than what he'd done. Anyway, because Price was interested in the occult and reincarnation and that sort of stuff, the new story, Through the Gates of the Silver Key, features Randolph Carter meeting a friendly version of Yog-Sothoth and getting to choose to experience any of these other incarnations. Well, it turns out that Randolph Carter is a total idiot, and he chooses to be a sorcerer on the planet Yaddith. So I'm kind of torn about Through the Gates of the Silver Key. I really hate the early part of the story, in which is full of Golden Dawn spiritualism, which, chokes me. But I love the last half of the story, in which Carter, in the body of the Zakalba thing, the alien sorcerer, are warring for control over the same body, and Carter travels to Earth. The last half of the story is 100% Lovecraft. That's maybe why I like it. The first half is influenced by Price's ideas. I mean, I do like some of E. Hoffman Price's other stories, but, whatever. Anyway, that's where we're going to focus here, on the creatures from Yaddith who only appear in this story and their history. Lovecraft describes the inhabitants of Yaddith as clawed and taper-snouted. When the creature is partly revealed after it comes to Earth, its hand is described as something long, shiny, and black, and its face is enough to give an old man a heart attack when it's suddenly revealed a mask is pulled off. Now, I made these figures you see here for my upcoming game Hyperspace, in which you can play as the guys from Yaddith. Now, in the story, Zicalba, the sorcerer who's inhabited by Randolph Carter, the Yaddithian, travels to Earth, which apparently takes hundreds of thousands of years. Lovecraft is always a scientist, so he discusses the fact that the Yaddith creature can't just come to Earth. It needs protection from Earth's bacteria and conditions, and it needs to train for years to be able to form human words at all, instead of just making the hideous buzzing clicks of the Yaddith tongue. It learns to stand erect like a human. It has to do all this stuff, you know? So, now Yaddith is an endangered world. Huge worm-like monsters are burrowing through it, and they'll eventually make it uninhabitable. The Sorcerers of Yaddith spend all the time making enchantments and magic to keep the worms under control. Lovecraft called these worms bowls. But when the story was published, his editor changed the word to doles. So we'll talk more about them in a future video, but for now we're going to call these doles after what the editor changed it to, for reasons that I'll explain in that future video. Instead of fighting off the doles, Zicalba goes into hibernation until the time is right for a return to Earth, which he takes in what Lovecraft calls a light envelope, or in other words, a starship. This was so early in the development of science fiction that the word starship, as far as I can tell, hadn't been invented. In other stories about trips to other worlds, the methods used were a giant cannon. For example, in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, the Martians use a cannon to fire guys to Earth, right? Or sometimes, like in Edgar Rice Burroughs, they use psychic transference or other weird things. Lovecraft was one of the very first authors, not the first, but one of the first, to come up with the idea of a self-propelled ship to travel from star to star. So let's focus again on the Yaddith creatures. They're technologically advanced. They have seismic monitors that measure the core of their planet. They can make spaceships and so forth. They don't seem to be super beings like the old ones or Yithians, but they're certainly as smart as humans, if not more. And they also have sorcery. Now, in my picture, I tried to show this by putting them in a sorceress pose, but with electronic devices attached to them, kind of a magic technology mix. Now, their world is doomed, and so I imagine their philosophy is kind of dark. The Zicalba thing from the story is not portrayed as evil, but it's certainly dangerous. When its personality takes over, the humans back away in fear. But remember, he's not really a sorcerer, because Lovecraft's magic isn't really magic. It's dark, unknown science, which is controlled by the minds and machines of alien beings, and occasionally humans. They're not magicians in the normal sense. Zicalba didn't sell a soul to the devil or anything. His magic is a branch of science that we don't understand. Yet, with all their power, the Yaddithians could not save their world. This is a dark, nihilistic tale. Let us be warned. Get notifications, subscribe, and you can buy stuff from me, which are pictured here. Thanks!